This episode of AfroTech Talk is sponsored by Maarifasasa. Maarifasasa is an EdTech company that provides digital skills through reskilling and upskilling for Africa's youth. Check out their website for available courses.
You mentioned your nephew Joel enrolled for a web development course. How is that going?
He did. It's actually thrilling to see the tremendous skills he has acquired within a very short period of time. We shall soon have a guru in the family. Okay. Yeah, he loves the way the courses are segmented and tailored towards his needs, He also says the content is really, really educative and the mentors are wonderful and amazing.
To all our listeners, click on the link below to get amazingly special discounts on any course that you enroll for through AfroTech Talk only.
Coming up next.
There are quite a number of barriers to entry, and even some of those barriers still persist today. The first one was digital literacy. Okay. Now, if you're talking about education technology, that means you need to have some level of proficiency with technology, right? And digital literacy is a very fundamental, aspect.
Hi there and welcome to this podcast. I am Andrew Locker.
And I'm Diana Ayo. Thanks for tuning in. On the AfroTech Talk podcast, we speak to tech experts, individuals in the tech space, as well as young people about the latest trends and innovations in Africa to explore how tech is transforming their society. We filter our guests' profound insights into actionable guidance, empowering listeners to find inspiration and actively participate in the ongoing tech revolution.
If you are new to the show or would want to recommend our podcast to your friends and family, our starter packs are a great place for you to get hooked. We understand that it can be a bit hard to get started, so for this, we have our episodes segmented into different topics that will have you started right away. Visit afrotechtalk.africa.
Today, we speak to Robert Bob Okello, who is a tech enthusiast and also the CEO of Maarifasasa, with several years of experience in the digital space.
So in today's episode, we are joined by one really amazing man. I normally call him the digital nomad.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for inviting me to the show. I'm very excited about the conversation we'll have today, and it's a pleasure to be a guest on this episode. I must say that I'm an avid listener of the AfroTech Talk podcast. And so it's truly an honor to be one of the guests on this particular podcast that I love so much.
So just to get our curiosity out of the way, who are you?
That's a good question. Who am I? All right. Whenever people ask me that question before, we quickly go into saying, what we do and all that. But of late, I've been really actually taking time to think about that question, like, who am I? Now, some people will call me an entrepreneur. They would be right, of course. I work as the founder of Maarifasasa Limited, which is an EdTech startup. We'll learn more about that later in the show. I'm a techie. Some would say that. I love technology. And I do believe that technology can be a great tool in terms of leveling the playfield, in terms of access to opportunities, and just enabling people to achieve a lot much more at much greater scale. So that's why I'm very passionate about technology in general. And some will also describe me as, a true Ugandan, son of the soil. And they would be right. I was born in Uganda. I grew up here in Lira, in the northern part of Uganda. And some would call me a digital nomad, like you just did. And they would also be right. Again, I just love experiencing the world. I think we live in a very beautiful world, and very often most people don't really get the chance to perhaps travel around the world and appreciate what different cultures has to offer. And so I think that is a lifestyle that technology allows us to do today, where you can really work from anywhere. And so in that sense, being a digital nomad is something that I definitely very much relate to. But when I think about myself, I've told you what people would describe me as, but I think for me, I'm just a very humble child of God. And I think everything I do at the end of the day is to give glory to my Father in heaven. That for me is perhaps the strongest identity that I have, and no one can take that away from me. Those other things can change, but I think for me, this is one identity that is a constant. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of who I am, and I hope I've answered it, quite well.
That's right. So because today we're looking at EdTech, in your view, what's EdTech to a common listener out there who doesn't really understand what this is? What's EdTech?
Fantastic. I'm glad you asked, that question, because it's very important to put, into context what EdTech is. If the rest of this podcast will be really talking about EdTech. EdTech is actually short for education technology, which is basically all about how we use technology and the different information and communication technologies really to deliver learning. If you think about education, basically, EdTech then leads us to two words, education and technology. So what is education and what is technology, in a sense that would give us, very basic understanding of what EdTech is. And education to me is just really the process of acquiring knowledge, right? And so using these different, information and communication technology tools in that process of helping people acquire knowledge is really what EdTech or education technology is all about.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hope you who is listening to this has really picked that grasp. So maybe let's pivot into where we are today. So what really motivated you to get into EdTech?
That's a very good question. In terms of the motivation, let me give you just a bit of background, right? So I told you that I grew up in the northern part of Uganda in Lera, a very small town. Andrew and we grew together. For those of you who are listening, actually, Andrew and I went to the same school many, many years ago before some of you were born. Okay, maybe not. But we have a very similar story in terms of what our upbringing was. And if you remember, when we were growing up, this part of the country in Uganda was going through, towards the last years of the political instability that was in the region. And so for me, really, this was my world. Lera was really the definition of my world. We had never been exposed to anything beyond this beautiful town of ours that we love so much, But when I finished my P7, the primaries, leaving examinations here, we sat together, if you remember. Yeah. I hope you still remember. We sat together. So when we finished this, most people don't know, but for me, it was actually almost the end of the road. After finishing P7, the hopes of continuing in the Form 1 were very slim for one reason. They were very limited financial resources at the time. Most of my elder siblings were either just joining university or were already at the university. And so they were, in a sense, the priority at that point, financially, at least seeing them through. So the option for me was to either wait, which really meant that I would stay out of school for some time, effectively a dropout for that sense. But it was not until, our headmaster, Mr. Ochola, if you remember, when I went to get my P7 pass slip, he told me that there's a school in Kampala that was offering scholarships and bursaries. And so, I got the name of the school, and then I went home and told my parents. He later found out about the school. We contacted the school, and they said, indeed, there are 20 scholarships this year. 18 of them had already been taken. There were only 2 left. And so I had to make a trip that night, my first trip to Kampala, from Lera to Kampala. We left around 6 p.m. and by midnight I was in Kampala. And as you can imagine, it was a whole new world for me. I thought I'd arrived in the New York we used to see in the movies, all these light streets are very busy, and now Kampala doesn't have very high-rise buildings, especially then. It's about 2009, But I thought I'd arrived, all those buildings looked like skyscrapers to me. Long story short, I ended up getting that scholarship that really changed my life. So for the next 4 years, I would be at Turkish Light Academy. Then now just called Light Academy. And finished my O-levels. After finishing O-levels, now the only option for me was to do really well and get another scholarship or go back to the village. Coming back to the village wasn't an option per se, so I had to give it my very best. And luckily, I think after finishing Form 4, the results came out and I'd done really well, and I got another scholarship to start my Form 5. And it was during my early days of Form 5, around April, this is 2013, I learned about scholarship opportunity with the United World Colleges, and I did apply. I went for the interviews. Long story short, I got another scholarship and I ended up going to Norway for the 2 years of my A-levels. And while in Norway, that's when I began to see, I had to interact with a lot of people. So the UWC Red Cross Nordic in Norway, we were 200 students from about 95 countries. So it was literally, we were in our own bubble in a sense, but it was like a small little world in the middle of nowhere, in the fields of Norway, right? And for the first time, I was interacting with people from all kinds of backgrounds, all nationalities. I remember my room, we were 5 of us in the room. It was me from Uganda. We had a guy from, Poland, a roommate from Sweden. We had a gentleman from China. And then another colleague of ours from Colombia, very diverse setting, classrooms, teachers from all over the place. And that really opened the world to me. And fast forward 2 years later, I looking into universities and I applied to several universities in the US. And long story short, I end up at the University of Oklahoma. It was at the University of Oklahoma that it really, occurred to me as I saw that this is when the talks around massive open online courses, or MOOCs in short, were really, really taking shape. The likes of Coursera, EdTech, were really, really beginning to pick up. And I began tinkering with some of these platforms, and I discovered that you could literally take a course from any university, especially the top universities in the world, for free. All you needed was a laptop and an internet connection, or any device for that matter that can connect to the internet, really, and that's when I think these ideas of online learning started really taking shape in my mind. And it was around that time I'd met another colleague of ours, who then became actually one of the initial co-founders of Maarifasasa, Ismail Ombo from South Sudan. His story is very similar to mine. It was very much disrupted by war in South Sudan, ended up at the UWC in Italy. And so we met in Oklahoma, a very unlikely place for Ugandan to meet another South Sudanese. But that's what happened. And we shared the same passion for education, really. But really what the key inspiration was, and still is for us, was about, democratizing access to opportunity. And I share my story because if you think about P7, if I did not get access to that opportunity of a scholarship, I was going to be a P7 dropout. After Form 4, there was another opportunity for a scholarship that allowed me to continue, and another one that allowed me to go to Norway, and another one that allowed me to, move to the US, right? And in all these things, it's not because I was the most gifted or most talented. There's so many talented people. We all know, you're listening to this podcast, you know a lot of people who are very gifted, right? But, it occurred to us that talent is very evenly distributed for the most of it, right? But opportunity is not. And so for us, the inspiration was, how do we use, one, the exposure that we have gotten, and two, the power that technology offers, right, to democratize access to educational opportunities, right? Both Ismail and I, we had seen firsthand the impact of quality education in our own lives through the different, scholarship opportunities and education opportunities that we had gotten. And one of the bigger burdens we both bore in our hearts was, what can we do to ever pay back everyone that believed in us and in a sense were able to offer us these opportunities, right? And the truth is, there's nothing we can do to pay them back in terms of monetary sense, right? Perhaps the only thing we can do, and this is what we zeroed down on, is if we can show some level of appreciation to all these people, it would be through creating similar opportunities for other people. And that is really how Maarifasasa was born, with that premise of using technology to create educational opportunities for other people. And as Mandela said, education is indeed the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. And we took that literally and really started, building from scratch. It did not work so well at the beginning. I remember the first website we built was so heavy that it would take forever to load. And that wasn't very contextual appropriate, given that, internet speeds and all that kind of stuff was still low. But in a nutshell, that's really the journey of how Maarifasasa, was born, what inspired it, and how we started.
And for our listeners, in our previous episode, we mentioned that you could actually take a course via the Maarifasasa platform. So today we're actually hosting the founder of that. It's really a privilege to have him on our show. So when you actually got into this, what were the barriers to entry in EdTech? I'm talking, this should have been maybe 2018. I know. In most cases, barriers to entry keep changing. So then what was the barrier to entry in EdTech?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are quite a number of barriers to entry, and even some of those barriers still persist today. The first one was digital literacy. Okay. Now, if you're talking about education technology, that means you need to have some level of proficiency with technology, right? And digital literacy is a very fundamental, aspect of that. I mean, just think about our formal education, in Uganda and many parts of the world. You need to, first of all, most education is delivered in a particular language. Now, if you're in a country like Uganda, English is sort of the key language, right? So you need to know both the spoken and the written English. And that is sort of what literacy really, and understanding numbers, right? Now, the same applies when it comes to education technology. When you're talking about technology, you need some basic literacy in terms of digital literacy for you to be able to effectively, utilize that platform. Okay. And so one of the key barriers of entry that we saw at the beginning was that most of the people we're targeting, and this were, young Africans between the ages of 18 to 35 today, did not actually have the foundational digital literacy to sit in front of a computer, use the internet, and be able to access online education. We use tools that are technology, oriented, right? That was number one. Number two, the other barrier had to do with access to electronic devices. Again, we talked about massive open online courses. The key ingredients are you need a computer or a smartphone or any device that can access the internet, right? Now, most people do not have access to that. Okay. They don't know how to use it. They don't have it anyway. The third aspect is that, most of these educational resources tend to be online. Yeah. So internet access becomes another key barrier. Limited access to internet was another key barrier. Those, I would say, were the three most critical barriers that we had to find ways of dealing with and still continue to navigate even today, right? But there are a few things that we did at the beginning to kind of begin to alleviate that. And some of this, you interacted with some of the solutions. I don't know if you knew exactly that was part of a bigger grand plan. If you remember correctly, we launched a digital literacy center, deep in the village there. That was actually part of that long-term plan. It's like, okay, let's see if we can do something when it comes to digital literacy. So we set up a computer lab. I remember, we applied for a grant from the Davis Projects for Peace. And the idea was very simple, set up a computer learning center, make sure that the devices are there, and where possible, make internet access available, and then begin to teach foundational digital literacy from the basics of Microsoft Office, understanding the internet, what is the internet, creating email addresses. That was basically the goal initially. And what we hoped to achieve was basically simple, teach people how to use computers, expose them to the internet, and show them where they can find access to all these learning opportunities. And the rest will just fall in place, right? So we did that. We offered several trainings here and there, and so that model seemed to have actually worked. But I remember, that was there were only 10 computers in that place, and it's in one location, right? But there's so many people that needed to be reached. So we later on got involved with the Google Digital Skills for Africa program. And I think you were part of that as well at some point, where we started going to different locations to train people on how to, use the internet, create email addresses, put businesses online and all those sort of things. Again, there it was about filling the gap in terms of the digital literacy, right? And then when it comes to internet, for the most of it, we have seen tremendous improvements. In Uganda in general, internet costs have relatively gone down. But also when it comes to access to devices, we now see that the cost of a smartphone today is significantly lower compared to back then. So a lot more people have smartphones today. A lot more people are using the internet today, thanks to COVID, which was a big catalyst in terms of internet adoption. We see a lot more people now online, using the internet with laptops and smartphones. So I think that's how some of those initial 3 barriers have been addressed.
I always see Africa as a very unique continent, because almost every challenge that we face in each country, it's like a default,
right?
To most of the country. So you mentioned something about the many languages or the cultural aspect. That is, I think in Africa we have maybe a little over 1,000 languages that are spoken. So how is that, maybe a challenge when it comes to EdTech, in Africa?
Right. I think, the diversity in terms of languages across Africa, well, it could be perceived as a challenge, but also I think it presents a lot of opportunities, right? Especially for those who are really focused on delivering last mile solutions. Obviously, we all know that the language of the internet is pretty much English for the most of it today, right? Without English, you have very limited, things you can do online, right? So also ensuring that, most people can speak. But across Africa, we have several languages that are spoken. You have English, you have Arabic is a big one, and then you have French as well, right? Which tend to be, the language of our colonial masters, so to speak. But I think these 3 languages have, in a sense, made it a little bit easier for us to communicate even across barriers. In spite of the limitations that sometimes our local languages could present, right? Because if you look at Uganda alone, there are 50-something languages. You go to a place like Nigeria, and immediately there are hundreds or even not thousands of languages actually. So looking at how we can, of course, first of all, rely on the mainly spoken languages to begin to deliver learning. But now we see solutions where, certain content is now being created in local languages like Swahili, for example, Luganda, and that I think is also going to be a game changer in places, especially for Swahili. I see Swahili as a very Pan-African language.
Yes.
And so I think looking in terms of how we can continue to bridge those barriers when it comes to, the different languages, we should begin to, first of all, I think the languages have to make, of course, economic sense, right? Putting on my, entrepreneur hat, if I'm training, it's expensive to create content, right? Especially if that's being subsidized or anything. So you want to begin to create content in a language that is spoken by the most people you can reach, right? And then that begins to trickle down. But I think we are seeing a move now to a lot of local languages, getting online as well. So whereas English is the language of the internet for the most of it today, we now see a lot of local languages coming up. And we have seen also, a rise, especially due to the rise of some new platforms that make it very easy for people to create content. A case in point is TikTok, You don't need to speak English to be on TikTok. Whether you speak Luo, whatever language you speak, you can just create content, and there's going to be an audience of people that actually, consume that kind of content. So we're seeing an increase in terms of the linguistic diversity online. And I think that also points us in the direction where we'll see a lot of educational content also now being produced in the different languages across Africa. So whereas it can be a challenge, it's also, an exciting opportunity, especially for educational content creators to target, those larger groups of, language speakers in the different parts of Africa.
What solution, what greatest solution is EdTech actually creating for the continent? We understand there are just so many. There is fintech, we have them all over the place. So what problems are you actually solving in the continent?
Right. So when it comes to EdTech and of democratizing access to educational content, right? I'll give you a simple example. If you think about a traditional school setting, right? By virtue of being physical, there are already some inherent limitations to that, right? Classrooms have particular sizes. They can only accommodate a certain number of students. Every school has a certain number of teachers, right? And, the student-teacher ratio in many of our African classrooms are far from ideal, right? Which shows that there's very high demand in terms of educational content, but also on the other side of, the supply and the quality of that in terms of the teachers and all that is very low. Now, it's not written anywhere. It's not like one of the 10 commandments, that a teacher in a particular school should only teach a classroom of 50, in their particular part of Africa or whatever country they're in, But that is a limitation that the current system, offline system, offers to us. Now, EdTech actually comes to address that a good teacher in any part of Africa can reach learners from any part of the world, right? If they're able to deliver that content online. Now, that is radical, right? And that is one tremendous power of EdTech. Secondly, today, you can learn anything pretty much online. There are lots of free resources out there. There are lots of paid content out there. Normally, the default is the University of YouTube, right? If you go to YouTube, you can learn anything, right? That is part of educational technology, right? And teachers who understand that are using that. If you go to YouTube and enter any topic, you're going to find video content for that, and you can learn from that. When I was at the university, sometimes, when the math teacher was doing, calculus 3, and the math teacher, is doing the stuff, in that lesson of like 80 minutes, and I'm like, I don't get it, I would simply go to YouTube and learn the same thing in much shorter time and get better explanations than my professor, So EdTech really has that ability of ensuring that, learners can access diverse content about diverse topics from diverse teachers all over the world, right? That's a very powerful thing that I think sometimes we don't really appreciate how powerful that is. The other aspect is in terms of actually ensuring that the cost of education, right, becomes more affordable. EdTech has that power to do that as well. Again, if you think about our traditional school system, like why should school fees be increasing every year? Because, the cost of running physical properties, in schools, the cost of living is increasing, right? So by virtue of that, we see the cost of education also going up, but sometimes it doesn't make sense. People just increasing cost, but we don't see an improvement in the value that is being delivered, right? But running a physical school, you need to pay utilities and all these sort of things, right? So it drives the cost of education quite high. But when it comes to EdTech, we are able to significantly actually lower costs, especially if now people, case in point, think about during COVID, where a lot of schools around the world, people were learning remotely online and no one was in the physical school. It goes on to tell us that education can continue, learning can continue, even if we're not at school, right, in that physical place. Perhaps it begins to help us to, redefine what a school actually is, because we tend to limit our thinking of a school to this physical place with buildings and teachers and learners come and then, but that can now happen anywhere, So the activity of learning doesn't need to be confined into some four walls, right? And really, that is what EdTech makes possible. So I think if we can, begin to move towards really, improving the infrastructure that makes it possible for EdTech to thrive, right? For online learning to thrive, we will see, massive results when it comes to the number of people having access to educational opportunities, as well as ensuring that, our teachers are actually empowered to have more impact, right? A single teacher that teaches in one school for their entire career, and another teacher that just teaches online, one of those two people will have a significantly higher impact, the number of learners they can reach. And I think we know exactly which of those two are. Exactly.
Okay, so recently you've actually been moving throughout Africa. So what lessons would we take? Maybe I'll first of all bring this to a country level, yeah, to Uganda, and then we'll actually expand it through the region and then throughout the continent. So what do you think has to be done differently, according to your experience, that is currently not being done, but really has to be done to make sure EdTech can really thrive? Let's start with Uganda, then you will span over.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Now, the first thing, and we've been preaching this for a long time at Maarifasasa. To understand what needs to be done better, we need to first examine what hasn't worked, right? Wow. And one thing we have seen, we have been to a number of schools. Whenever technology is introduced, the traditional approach tends to be one where tech is just brought into the classroom and thrown at teachers. We have seen interventions where smart boards are brought, projectors are brought, but nobody is really trained to effectively use those things, right? And so people will try to fidget around it, and a few months later, they'll just resort to their chalk and the blackboard, right? Besides a very beautiful projector and smart board. Okay. Why is that the case? I think the fundamental issue is that most of the failed EdTech interventions in the past failed because they forgot a very critical aspect of it, which is ensuring that the teachers in the classrooms were actually empowered to make the most of that tech, right? Now remember that most of these teachers are standing in front of what we'll call the digital natives, people who are born with smartphones in their hands, okay? So the rate at which they learn a lot of these tech tools is much quicker than some of the teachers that are standing in front of them, No teacher wants to stand in front of a group of learners and feel intimidated, They want to be in charge, most of our teachers at least, So by not involving our teachers in any education technology intervention, we actually risk, seeing all these sort of failures in terms of these interventions. Okay. So what I think needs to be done is, of course, ensuring that we are having these teachers at the center of these EdTech interventions. During COVID, we ran several training programs for teachers online, how to use technology, okay? Because we knew most of them had to find out how to use Zoom for the first time. They'd never heard of the word Zoom, except as an English word. And now they're saying that Zoom, you have to teach online and all that, screen sharing and all these sort of tools. That is what needs to be done. We need to make sure that our teachers are actually being trained. Now, from a more, systemic level, technology has to be integrated into the teacher training curriculum, right? When we go to our teacher training colleges, we have to make sure that in the curriculum, and as we're preparing them to go and teach, especially in this new era, there has to be a strong technology training component in the teacher training curriculum, so that by the time they go into the classroom, they are very well aware and exposed to this new technology, so how to use them. But also, for the most of it, they have been fine-tuned with the mindset, right, of how to use technology, because the tools keep changing all the time, right? But once you understand and you appreciate the value of that, then you begin to embrace the learnings, constant learning as tools keep changing. The end goal is really the same, which is to use all these tools to improve learning outcomes, right? So that is a very key intervention, or perhaps one of the things I strongly believe could be done better. The extent to which we prepare our educators, our teachers, on how to effectively use technology in their classrooms to improve learning outcomes. Yeah.
But in spite of all these challenges, we see that some countries have fairly done okay when it comes to EdTech adoption, and actually the tech adoption in general. In East Africa, we have a very good example of Kenya. They've really done well. When you go to West Africa, Nigeria is actually at the top. South Africa, these countries have pretty done well when it comes to adopting this. So what lessons does the continent actually have to draw from these three countries?
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned the likes of Kenya, right? And Kenya is a good place to look at, because it wasn't just an overnight success. They have definitely been very deliberate about that. There was the one child, one PC sort of tab campaign that they did in Kenya, and it did not succeed immediately. Yeah. I remember coming across one of those tablets from Kenya in a market in Uganda here, right? But for me, I think it was the intention behind that, that they actually thought that it's important to ensure that every learner in every classroom has access to these tablets, right? And access to a PC. And I'm sure they learned a lot from that, and that's why we can talk about Kenya as a good example of how adoption of technology in the classroom or in EdTech in general. So what we see in these countries that you mentioned is, of course, a very deliberate move from a policy level, right, at the national level, to ensure that something is done in as far as democratizing access to this. And I think what they did, for example, is, of course, access. We talked about the three barriers, right? Digital literacy, as a key barrier to EdTech. And so addressing that is something I think they've gone a little bit ahead of us. But also the other key one, which interventions like, this one PC per child, the access to devices, So when you see those kind of deliberate moves from governments or the policy level, ensuring that people actually have access, that's a very good one. The other thing is when it comes to access to the internet, again, Kenya is a good example. The internet speed in Kenya is now very, very good, perhaps the best in East Africa. The cost is also relatively very affordable, right? So we see that these are, key infrastructure interventions that have very huge dividends when it comes to, ease of adoption. And then the third or fourth component really is, at the end of the day, the government's role is to just create an enabling environment for private actors like Maarifasasa to then come in, right? Make that environment attractive, remove any barriers. And if you can't make anything better, just don't make it worse, right? So that then begins to attract key private sector players who then, actually go in terms of delivering these EdTech solutions in an environment that allows for them to thrive while actually creating very, very, lasting impact. So I think that, again, you look at some of the leading EdTech companies across Africa, they come from some of those countries, right? Kenya, the number of EdTech players there, startups. Nigeria has a number of them. In South Africa, we have a number of them, even programs like Ingenie that's just more focused on EdTech solutions. But that is as a result of an ecosystem that allows for entrepreneurs and startups in this particular sector to actually operate in a conducive manner, right? And make it actually attractive for them to tackle some of these problems without any other unnecessary barriers and obstacles and hoops to jump. Yeah.
I recently stumbled across some report from World Bank in which they projected that by the year 2030 there will be over 230 million jobs that will be there, and then again these jobs will actually require that people actually have digital skills, and I see that EdTech is the best player, or we can put all our bets into EdTech. I know they say never put all your eggs in one basket. But this one, I think we can actually, just put every egg in this basket.
Right.
So out of this demand, in terms of the job, and then the skilling bit, they project that there still needs to be 650 million trainings that has to be done to kind of like match to this demand. How do you see EdTech playing a role in this?
Absolutely. So you mentioned it very well. The numbers are very clear, right? 230 million, jobs that will require digital skills. Over 650 million training opportunities as a result of that. Now, one thing that I mentioned earlier is the power of technology to actually, allow us to deploy educational solutions at scale, right? Technology at the end of the day is just an enabler. It's a tool, right? Which means we have to first get the basics right. We have to understand, what is the curriculum that we're delivering that actually prepares people with these skills that are going to be relevant and in demand. How do we ensure that, we're engaging both the educators and the private sector to really inform the kind of skills that people need to be trained in, right? That actually, good for society. Once those basics are done, technology now comes in terms of helping us deliver that at scale, right? The only way we're going to be able to deliver, 650 million trainings in the next 7 years, that's when 2030 is, actually 6.5 years, right? It's not going to be through physical classrooms.
True.
It cannot be, right? It's going to be through that, but most importantly, by using some of these educational technology solutions, online education that ensures that we can deploy learnings to millions of people in one go, right? So I think platforms that deliver, online, in-demand digital skills are going to be very, very pivotal in helping us to achieve those numbers, right? So that's a very critical role that, EdTech will play. And at Maarifasasa, we are very committed to that as well. Right now we are very focused on delivering digital employment opportunities. We are looking at those 230 million jobs that require digital skills, and we're asking ourselves, what are those skills that are needed, right? Is it web development? Is it digital marketing? Is it virtual assistants, right? And then using the market demands of those skills to inform our design of the courses, the choice of curriculum that we actually pursue, right? To make sure that when we're training people, we are actually in touch with the market forces, right? So that after learning a particular skill, you know exactly where to apply it, okay? And that's where the jobs aspect comes in. But I do believe that without harnessing the power of educational technologies, we won't be able to train the 650 million people. And so EdTech, technology platforms is really what increases significantly our chance of training young Africans at that scale.
That was our conversation with Robert Bob Okello, the CEO of Maarifasasa. From AfroTech Talk, this is the first part of this episode. Stay tuned for the second part. And if you'd like to get started or would rather love to advance in your tech skills, we recommend enrolling for a course at Maarifasasa Academy. And just in case you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, please do subscribe, like, share, and follow on the different platforms.
This podcast is hosted and directed by Andrew and Diana, edited and produced by Maarifasasa Studios for AfroTech Talk.